Hitting home. Demonstrators make good on their threats to protest a Supreme Court case on the future of abortion in America. We have a report, Reaction Plus, a look at the churches and pro-life organizations targeted in recent days. Hong Kong elections. A new hardline leader takes office in the former British territory. And remembering our mothers. Pope Francis shares a message of prayer and affection. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, May 9th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Protests stoked by pro-abortion sentiment have caused disruption and damage nationwide. These disturbing incidents follow the leak of a Supreme Court draft opinion suggesting that Roe versus Wade may be overturned. The homes of two Supreme Court justices were targeted during the weekend in suburban Washington, D.C. in Los Angeles. Protesters wearing red costumes from the feminist novel A Handmaid's Tale interrupted Sunday morning mass on Mother's Day. And in Denton, Texas, a pro-life pregnancy center was vandalized. Other incidents included a suspected arson attack at a Wisconsin pro-life headquarters, protesters chanting at Old St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan. That protest caused cancellation of a first Saturday pro-life march, and a pro-abortion group threatened desecration of the Holy Eucharist. The Roe versus Wade battle is heading to the Senate floor. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced that he will be putting a bill to codify the controversial issue up for a vote on Wednesday amid more concerns of targeting churches and pro-life organizations. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now from outside of St. Peter's Church on Capitol Hill with the latest.
St. Peter's Catholic Church sits directly across the street from the Capitol. Parishioners tell me that they didn't have any disruptions at any of the masses this past Sunday, like many other churches across the country, and they pray that it will continue that way. Meanwhile, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle continue to weigh in on the leaked draft of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Regardless of what side you're on in this debate, you should be willing to stand up for the rule of law and the integrity of our institutions. That shouldn't be a partisan issue.
This is the biggest fight of a generation. We are not giving up. We will never give in, and we will keep fighting. And if the American people are paying attention, this issue will also be on the ballot in November.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has filed a motion leading to a final vote on Wednesday on the Women's Health Protection Act, which would codify Roe v. Wade. But it doesn't have 60 votes to pass. Hitting that threshold is unlikely. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, a Catholic, says he will not support the bill. Republicans tell me each state should decide.
Let the voters of each state decide, because as far as I can tell, the Constitution does not weigh in one side or the other. So if they want to bring a law, that's their right to do it. But on the other hand, don't try and jam something down the throats of
13 states have so-called trigger laws, which would quickly ban an abortion if Roe is overturned. One of those states is Mississippi, and its Governor Tate Reeves says ending Roe would be a big win for abortion opponents.
We're trying to provide those potential expectant mothers the resources that they need so that they can go to a full term of pregnancy. If they choose to keep that child, then that's a great outcome.
Meanwhile, New York State's Attorney General announced a proposed bill to create a $50 million fund to increase access to abortions. The issue isn't going away. Many churches throughout the D.C. area are bracing for this next weekend when thousands are expected to converge in the nation's capital for a women's march. On Capitol Hill, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And joining us now is Amber Athey, Washington editor at The Spectator and host of the Unfit to Print podcast. Amber, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. As you know, and as mentioned, a lot happened over the weekend, including protests at some Catholic churches, including in Los Angeles, and a particularly vile protest outside of Old St. Patrick Church in New York. But one of the most extreme forms of protest took place at a pro-life organization in Wisconsin, where Molotov cocktails were thrown into the building and a fire was set. Graffiti was also spray painted on the building. building that said, if abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. Amber, help us unpack all of this. I mean, it's really hard to wrap your mind around it.
I think everything that we've seen since this draft opinion was leaked to Politico is an intimidation tactic to try to get the justices to change their minds on this draft opinion. Chief Justice John Roberts has acknowledged that this draft opinion is real. He did say it's not final. However, he's also promised to investigate who the leaker was and, of course, what their intentions were. But really what's saddening to see is that it took the Biden administration almost a week to denounce some of these intimidation tactics. And even still, they've only talked about specific instances of violence without making clear that these protests outside of the homes of the Supreme Court justices, as well as the attempts to intrude on Catholic masses, are really just two sides of the same coin. All of these instances, whether they're expressly violent or not, are all attempts to intimidate, and therefore could be considered obstruction of justice, or in the case of the interruptions of the masses, against an act that prevents people from allowing the free exercise of religion. So these are all contemptible and need to be spoken against very strongly by the Biden administration to make sure that these actions don't continue.
Yeah, we were just looking at some video right there from some of the protesters outside of some of the justices' homes in the D.C. area. We're also learning that now all of the justices apparently have been given extra security. I want to get your thoughts on that. And as far as the protests outside of their homes, what more do we know about that, and are they even legal?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great argument that they're not legal, that these could be considered obstruction of justice. It actually says pretty specifically in the United States Code that people are not allowed to protest or demonstrate outside of the buildings that justices are present in, with the intention of trying to get them to change their opinion, particularly during an ongoing case. So I think that it's pretty clear that these could be considered illegal demonstrations because they are in attempts to intimidate these justices into changing their opinion. And these people have described these as candlelight vigils, but when you actually watch the videos of what they're doing, they're outside the homes of these people who live with their families, with their young children. They're shouting. They are clearly very raucous and are walking back and forth, specifically between the homes of Justice Brett Kavanaugh and Justice John Roberts, who have received extra security as a result. So this is definitely a step too far. This is not a peaceful protest by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I think anybody could agree with that for sure. Before I let you go, Amber, where do you see all of this going, and what do you think needs to be done? I mean, how can people exercise their First Amendment rights while avoiding the violence and destruction that we've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between people making their voices heard in a way that is peaceful, in a way that is consistent with the concept of your First Amendment rights. And then the other side of this is in a way where you're intentionally trying to intimidate and scare people into changing their opinions. That is an entirely different beast. And unfortunately, unless the Biden administration, again, speaks out more strongly against this, I think we're going to only see this escalate. And the Biden administration's Department of Justice should absolutely get involved here in cracking down on some of the illegal protests, as well as helping to investigate who actually leaked this draft opinion in the first place, which was clearly all an attempt to really drum up this opposition to the opinion and hopefully get it changed.
And real quick, any final thoughts?
Sure. Well, I am a pro-life person. I really hope to see the justices stand strong in the face of this intimidation and continue with their attempts to overturn Roe v. Wade. Ultimately, this is an issue for federalism to decide, and each state should have the opportunity to make the decision about whether or not they want to ban abortions, because there is no right in the Constitution for women to kill their unborn child.
Well, Amber, thank you so much for coming on. We always appreciate your analysis.
Thank you.
A White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki warns protesters not to resort to violence. She tweeted this morning that President Joe Biden strongly believes in the constitutional right to protest, but that should never include violence, threats, or vandalism. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Hi, Tracy. And this afternoon in a White House press briefing, the White House press secretary Jen Psaki reiterated the president's view has long been that violence, intimidation, and threats have no place in political discourse. Now, her comments come as the Biden administration faces high gas prices, the potential for a recession, inflation, and of course the ongoing war in Ukraine.
President Joe Biden arrives back at the White House from Delaware, walking past reporters straight into the Oval Office. Sunday, he spoke virtually to other world leaders about the war in Ukraine, where bombings like this one continue to kill civilians. In Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin commemorates World War II Victory Day while blaming Western policies for essentially forcing Russia to invade Ukraine.
I want to thank members of Congress here for getting this passed.
President Biden just signed into law the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act, aimed at streamlining the process for sending aid to Ukraine.
Every day, Ukrainians pay with their lives, and they fight along the atrocities that the Russians are engaging in are just beyond the pale.
On the receiving end of that aid, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who said today, "We are fighting for our children's freedom, and therefore we will win." Meanwhile, economic pain in the U.S. AAA says a gallon of gas now about $4.32. Wall Street tumbling again, and inflation eating away at bigger paychecks. And in the Rose Garden this afternoon, a plan to ease some of the financial pain, cheaper internet.
It's going to change people's lives.
Under the program, people with low incomes could be eligible for free service thanks to the $1 trillion infrastructure package and companies offering discounts.
We want each of you, each and every one of you, to take advantage of the chance and cut your internet cost.
Now, the White House says tomorrow President Biden will deliver remarks on his plan to fight inflation and help lower costs for working families. The RNC, not too impressed by that. The Republican National Committee tweeting today, Joe Biden is running the economy right off a cliff with his reckless spending, inflation, and anti-U.S. energy agenda. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, analysis of the new leader in Hong Kong and what it means for the pro-democracy movement. At least 150 people were injured after clashes between pro-government supporters and those calling for a change in leadership in Sri Lanka. Security troops are deployed in the country's capital. There are unconfirmed reports that the prime minister has resigned due to the country's dire economic crisis. Well, the death toll from a powerful explosion at a luxury hotel in Cuba's capital is now up to more than 30 people. An apparent gas leak is blamed for the blast at the Hotel Saratoga as it was preparing to reopen after a 2-year closure. Damage in Havana included a Baptist church headquarters. Several dozen people were injured and 17 families remain missing. Pope Francis said that he is praying for those affected. The transition of leadership has taken place in the city of Hong Kong.
剛才我同行政長官會面嘅時候呢，討論咗喺未來幾個。
John Lee, a former security chief, has succeeded Carrie Lam as chief executive. Both Lee and Lam are Catholic. The two met today after Lee's election yesterday by a select committee. Lee was the only candidate. He is promising an administration to safeguard China's sovereignty. And joining me now to discuss is Gordon Chang, author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War and the Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, welcome back. Always so good to see you. So what more can you tell us about Hong Kong's election, and what do you expect to see from the new chief executive?
John Lee's election is symbolic in the sense it shows that China now totally controls Hong Kong. The political process has been Beijing's for quite some time, especially after the June 30, 2020 imposition of China's national security law over Hong Kong, which many people say was the end of law. But John Lee's election is really basically shows the world that now China is 100% in control of the territory.
Gordon, how do you think he'll be received? I mean, do you think that he'll face maybe the same type of backlash and protests that Carrie Lam saw during her term?
The 2019 protests, we probably won't see those for a little while because Beijing right now is making sure that there is no dissent permitted in Hong Kong. So opposition will be muted. But the Hong Kong chief executive, his 4 predecessors, have all been failures in different ways, but they've all been failures because it's an impossible job. Because Beijing demands that the chief executive do certain things, and the people in Hong Kong don't like those things. And so the chief executives always ended up being unpopular. And the same fate is going to await John Lee, because he's going to do things that the people in Hong Kong just do not like. For instance, COVID lockdowns, but also political repression.
And I want to switch gears here just a bit. China's export growth slowed to single digits in April, the weakest in almost 2 years. And this, as China's central bank says that it will increase its support of the country's slowing economy. Gordon, do you think the central bank stepping in, will that be enough to help China's economy rebound?
It won't be. The export growth in April was 3.9%. But what was even more distressing was that imports were flat. And imports are really important because they show domestic demand. You have the COVID-19 lockdowns, Shanghai, Beijing, and all along the east coast of China, which is really the factory floor. So China's economy is contracting. We have heard statements from the central bank and from central authorities over the last couple of weeks, and those have caused short-term stock rallies, but those stock rallies have faded because people understand that Beijing right now does not have any answers to an economy that it looks pretty grim.
And you had mentioned Shanghai citizens there are facing renewed COVID restrictions despite a drop in cases. And a resident there told Reuters, quote, "We are not afraid of the virus. We are afraid of this policy." I'd like to get your reaction to that.
Yes, well, this COVID-19 dynamic zero COVID policy, which has been the basis for these draconian lockdowns, hasn't been working. People have been taken away, even though they're COVID negative, been put in these large quarantine hospitals where they catch the disease. This daily testing has also spread COVID-19, and it's just pushed China, the people in Shanghai, to the breaking point. We've seen this with the suicides. We've seen this with the people surging out into the streets to buy food. Shanghai, which was once a very sophisticated society, the Shanghainese say they're the most sophisticated in the world. Well, they've been reduced to a primitive society right now, scrounging for food and daily necessities.
Gordon, I know you also recently wrote a column about China preparing to invade Taiwan. Talk to us a little bit more about that and any new developments.
April 22nd, the Chinese Finance Ministry and the central bank held a meeting with dozens of foreign and domestic bankers to figure out how China could avoid the effect of sanctions like the U.S. and others imposed on Russia for the invasion of Ukraine. That obviously shows that the Chinese leadership is thinking about invading either Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, India. Who knows? But the point is that the Chinese leaders are making active preparations to do something which they believe the international community will impose those measures. And that's the clearest sign yet that the Chinese leadership is now on an extremely aggressive path.
Gordon, we have probably about 30 seconds, maybe a little bit less, but I do want to ask you this. As you know, we have several midterm elections taking place in the United States. What are the chances that China's money could be influencing races?
About 100%. China put a lot of money into the 2020 presidential election. It did it indirectly through a number of different means. But we can expect the same thing for the midterms and for 2024. We can expect it for every election that we permit this. We should stop permitting it.
Yeah, we're going to leave it right there. Gordon, thank you as always. Always appreciate your analysis. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Up next, hear more about a religious educator who is about to be canonized as a saint. Pope Francis has named a new auxiliary bishop for the Diocese of Cleveland. Father Michael Woost had been a professor at a seminary in Ohio. The 63-year-old was born in Cleveland and has 2 brothers who are also priests in the diocese. He'll be installed this summer to serve nearly 700,000 Catholics. Pope Francis sends a special message to mothers on Mother's Day.
Ascoltare Gesù diventa così la via per scoprire che Egli ci conosce.
At a Sunday address to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father sent mothers, quote, our prayer, affection, and best wishes, and even asked for a round of applause for all mothers. Pope Francis also prayed again for a peaceful solution to the military conflict in Ukraine and asked for Our Lady of Pompeii to intervene. Well, the Vatican is preparing for the canonization of 10 new saints this coming weekend. Among them is Cesar de Bus, the founder of the Congregation of the Christian Doctrine Fathers. He was born in France in the 16th century and beatified in 1975. Pope Paul VI described his spiritual legacy as being able to, quote, promote a catechesis that is accessible, comprehensible, and adherent to the life. Joining us now from Rome is Father Paolo from the Congregation of the Christian Doctrine Fathers. Father Paolo, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Can you tell us a little bit more about Cesar de Bus, for those who may not be that familiar with him, and why he will be proclaimed a saint?
It's very interesting, his life, because it took a long time to understand his vocation, and passed through many different kind of work and the solution for his life, never been satisfied. And when he understood that he could consecrate himself completely to God, he did it fully, really, wholly, and with the poor, but especially then understanding the need of helping the people to meet Christ and to recognize his love. And so he did so through the catechesis and differentiating between the children who were in need of everything and the adults. So he elaborated two different ways to teach the Christianity, the Christian doctrine, as they were saying that time, and in a very modern way. So I think today it's important for us to know him because of his struggle in finding the proper way. And today is so difficult not to entrust oneself to God, asking him what I have to do in my life. And at the same time, his way to help the people to find out a personal meeting with the Lord. And so recognizing and feeling all his love, and through that to uplift the life and change the way of living.
Can you tell us a little more about the Congregation of the Christian Doctrine Fathers?
We are old, as you see, from the white bird. It's 400 years that we are here around the world, but mainly we remained in France, from where our founder lived. And then after contemporary, at a certain point, we came in Italy. And again, from France, we disappeared due to the French Revolution. We have many martyrs, fathers who were martyrized that time. Two are recognized, one is going to, and the same for the fourth. And then disappearing from France, we remain in Italy, and in the last 70, 80 years, we started to move also elsewhere, so Brazil, India, Burundi. And our goal is always the one to understand the local situation, what the people is, how the people knows Jesus, if he knows, how much, and what we can do in order to help. But as our founder, we take care of all the aspects. There are places in which we have schools, there are places in which we have catechetical centers, we have places where we have even dispensaries or embroidery and Silai centers. It depends on finding the way to be present there, to witness the Lord, our relation with him, and slowly to make understand how the ways to reach him.
Well, Father Paolo, thank you so much for everything that you do, and thank you for coming on and speaking with us today. We really appreciate it. God bless you. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.